Hi folks, it's Stephen here again, and the question I received, and I get this question a lot, but it's really trying to understand exactly how processing works, because a lot of people jump into the code and it's not like a lot of programming languages. It's designed to get you straight into creating visual and sound-based systems straight away. It hides a lot of boilerplate stuff you don't want to see. And that can be confusing in a way because you're expecting to see it, and maybe you've learned to program Java and it looks like Java, but you're missing public static void main. And these questions come up a lot. So let's do the world's probably worst and shortest introduction to processing. So if we create a method called void setup, and I'm assuming you know a little bit of coding, I'm just going to create these two methods and void draw. You'll see these a lot in most processing programs. And what they mean is setup is a method which will be called to set up your program, whatever it's meant to do. And it's called once and once only. It's the very first thing that's called. Draw will then be called a number of times a second for the rest of your program's run. So as soon as setup is finished, draw will start. It'll run once, then twice, then three times, and it'll keep running until you stop your program. Now if I go up here, the very first command I call is size, and that sets the size of the screen I'm going to use. And I'm going to set it to be 300 pixels wide by 300 pixels high, and that will be square. Okay, so with that complete program there, I hit the run command, and there is our window, which is 300 pixels wide and 300 pixels high. Stop that, and I'm going to change one of these values here to be, say, 600. So now it should be twice as wide as it is high. And there we go, twice as wide as high. You notice there's a grey background. Well, we didn't change the background. So we're going to do that next. I'm going to change these numbers a little bit more. So it'll be 600 by 400. And here I will call the background command. So we've moved from what setup and draw are. So setup is called once at the beginning to set up your program. I called size in my setup, and it set the size of my drawing window. Then in draw, it's going to be called multiple times a second. So whatever I do there will be the results of what I see on the screen, or it will result in what I see on the screen. So I'm going to start using processing methods now, and processing has a method called background, and I'm going to pass in an RGB value to it, red, green and blue, and they go from 0 to 255. So 255 is maximum red, green and blue, which will give me white. So when I run, I get a white screen. And if I was to set these to be 0 and 0, that's all red, no green or blue. So I should get all red. And I'm just going to manipulate the values a little bit just to see what different things we can get. So if we went with half red and blue and all green, we get this light colored green here, sort of luminous green. And again, you can change those numbers yourself and see what happens. For now, I'm leaving them all at 255. I can then start to consider what I draw. Now, every time you draw, it results in a frame. And the frame is the result of all the drawing commands. So I'm going to put in a comment here. And I'm going to put in a comment here. So it draws a frame at the speed, or continuously, I should have written, repeatedly, at frame rate. Now, the frame rate is what it's trying to draw at. It is quite possible that your computer can't draw at the frame rate you want, but hopefully you've a good computer. So we're going to say frame rate 2 here, and that means it's going to draw 2 frames a second, which is very, very slow, as you can imagine. So let's go down here, and we're going to draw a line, and our line can takes 4 parameters, which is the start and end point of the line. And I'm going to say the start and end point of the line is a random number, which is equal to the width of the screen, and a random number equal to the height of the screen, and I'm going to repeat those. And it's quite possible that line here will look very funny when we run. So we hit run, and you'll notice that twice a second it changes the line, which is between two random points on the screen. Okay. Now I want you to see what happens when I change the frame rate to be 20. So it's now 10 times faster. And you should see we're getting a lot more lines drawn on the screen. So let's go back to and just put the frame rate at 1. So it's 1 a second. Very slow, which is what we wanted. Okay. Now, something to note here. Every single time I run draw, two things happen. Background is called, which clears the background to white, and then a line is drawn. You only see one line at a time. Let's watch what happens if we comment out the background line and run again. So first of all, we never set it to white in the first place, so the default grey background stays. And then every time we draw a line, it overdraws the other lines, because we never said anything about clearing the screen. So hopefully, even with this ridiculously short introduction, you're getting the idea. Setup is the method which is called once. We can call a processing method like size, frame rate, background, line, and random, and each one of these does a different thing. Size and frame rate say make the width of the screen to be 600, the height to be 400. Frame rate is draw 1 frame a second. We're going to actually take out that line, so the default frame rate is probably 30 or 60 frames a second, I'm not sure, and watch what happens. Very, very fast. Let's comment out background again, and our screen fills up very quickly. So, in a nutshell, processing is a programming environment which makes it really easy to get visual elements on the screen fast. And if you're maybe a sound developer and you're using sound equipment, it's really good for that too. I'm not one of those, so I'm not going to comment on what you can do with it, but the results I've seen other people do with it are really impressive. I'm just a visuals guy, so I don't do the sound. So at that point, I think that's our really quick introduction to what setup and draw is. Okay, and next I'm going to look at drawing more complex shapes. Okay, so I'm going to take away the line command and I'm going to change it so that it draws a different type of shape. And I'm going to call a method which draws this shape, simply because I like introducing the ability to call methods that and tweak what they do, and it makes your draw method a little bit cleaner. So I'm going to add a method called draw shape, and draw shape takes a it could take a parameter or it could take no parameter. I'm going to start with no parameters. We might change that later on. And down here we will say void, because it does not return anything, draw a shape with no parameters, and this is where we write the code for drawing the shape. Now we should set the color of the pen we're using to draw the shape, and we should set the fill color that we're drawing the shape with. So to set the pen, we say stroke, and then we pass in the color. So I'm going to go with black as the color we're drawing the shape, so that's 0, 0, 0. You could set the weight of the pen you're drawing it with if you want. So okay, we'll do that to 3. We then set the fill color for the shape, and I think we'll go with white. Actually, no, white is our background color, so let's go with a light red maybe. And then we now have to draw the shape. Now, processing actually comes with some shapes. We can draw rectangles and circles and so on, but it's very common you'll want to draw a more complex polygon, and in that case you actually have to define a shape. So first of all, we'll do the rectangle. So we'll say 100, 100, 100, 100. So that will draw a rectangle at a position and a size. So let's run it and see what happens. So we can see the red and green mixed together gave us orange, and there is the very thick line around it, which is black, which is what we wanted to see. And we can now change that rect a little bit, and we'll call ellipse. An ellipse also has a position and a size. So when we run, we see something slightly different, very close, but slightly different, same colors and pens and so on, only it's a circle now. And what if we want to draw something much more complex? Well, that's where we have to look at the ability to tell processing we're ready to draw a particular type of shape, give it the positions to draw those shapes, and then finally draw it. So to do that, we're going to have to introduce a couple of different commands. So the very first one is begin shape, to help if we could spell. So begin shape, and we'll put in end shape before we put in any more. Okay, and we can specify a couple of things to begin shape. For instance, we can say that it's a closed shape, or we can say that it's not a closed shape. So if it's a closed shape, the second last point we want to connect with the last point, and if it's a closed shape, then the last point will automatically connect to our first point to give us a closed shape. So in between begin shape and end shape, we must specify the vertices, a vertex at a time, which we want to draw the shape. So we'll say 100, 100 for the first vertex, and we'll add a few more. Okay. Now, so what we've drawn here is our shape, which begins at vertex 100, 100, and then we go down to 200 on our height, so on our y-axis. So that moves down, still at position 100, 100, but we've gone down lower. Then we go over on our x-axis, and then we go up on the other axis. And I was just interrupted there by my 5-year-old coming to tell me it was dinner time, but we'll finish this before we go. So we've gone down now to 200, 200. We're in the sort of bottom right hand corner. Then we come back up to 100, but we're still over at 200. And we have given 4 points now, but we haven't closed the loop out. But we're going to run and see what it looks like first of all. So you'll notice that we had point 1, 2, 3, and 4. But the top is not closed. That's what we wanted to see. It means we have to close the shape, so we go to end shape and add in the close command, and then when we run, we will see that the final line is drawn along and it's closed. Now we can start to make a much more complex environment now. We can add in many more vertices. Now I'm just going to add in a few, but you can think about different shapes, and it's a good exercise to try and make things like Tetris shapes, and you know, the sort of very structured shapes, but you have to think about where the polygon points are. So I'm going to do a few here, but it's just trying to show you that we can make different types of shapes, but as we make them, it's all about figuring out how we make shapes and how we change them. So I'm just sort of changing numbers here semi-randomly. It's going to get weird when we put them all back together again, but that's the whole point. We want it to look a bit weird. So we expect to see something very jaggedy here when we run. So let's see what we got. There we go. So it's like a strange state or county somewhere. So with that new weird shape, what we've done is we've specified extra vertices, and it's drawn what we've asked it to draw. Now, you could change this so that you passed in a parameter for how many vertices you wanted and so on, but that might be a bit advanced for your first look at processing. Now, what we might do is change this here to take in parameters like color and, you know, maybe the pen color and the fill color, but that again is all completely up to you. Instead, what I want to do here is show what happens when I pass in a parameter for where to draw the shape. So right now 100, 100 and all these numbers are assuming that the center point of what we're drawing is the origin, which is in the top left hand corner. What if we moved that origin? What if we said that we wanted to translate to width divided by 2, comma, height divided by 2? What if we subtracted 100 from all these values? So subtract 100 from all of them, and I have a reason for doing that. And we'll leave that 100 to 100. Oh, sorry, that's 50, sorry. And that's 50. and that's 150, that's 100, that's 200, and that's 150. And these are back to 0 again. You don't actually need these, but so we hit run, and now our shape is centered on the screen because we changed all our values to 0, which you'd expect to be up here, but because we translated, and this is the most interesting thing, translating to the center of the screen, that's width divided by 2, height divided by 2, which gives us the very center of the screen, means the object is drawn from that point. Okay, now if we want to start doing even more interesting things, we can. What we can do, I'm going to change our numbers a little bit as well. What we can do is change these to be parameters. So we can say xpos, ypos, and these are the positions we want to draw in. So we can pass in xpos and ypos, and it'll draw there. And up here we pass in whatever we want. So I'm going to pass in 100, 200. So that will draw this shape with an origin point of 100 pixels in and 200 pixels down. And then we can start to get creative because we can say push matrix, and I'll explain why push matrix is important in a second. And then pop matrix. Now, when we call draw shape, we give it a position to draw it in, and we call the translate command. And translate commands are cumulative, which means that every time you call it, all the previous ones will be affected. Will affect the one you call, which means it's very hard to figure out where you're drawing things. Instead, push and pop matrix means that you're starting from 0 or from scratch every time you draw your shape. So we can actually draw several shapes now, and we'll change the numbers every time. And we'll go 150, 0. And we'll go 500 down and 300 over, I think we can fit. Okay. And we'll just get rid of that one. So we'll draw 4 shapes and see what we get. So you'll notice I can't see some of my shapes. And why can't I see them? Well, they've been drawn off screen where I didn't expect them to be drawn. So now we'll show you how to fix that. So folks, it's very confusing at first when you're trying to figure out why the shapes don't draw on the screen the way you expect them to. But that's because push matrix and pop matrix actually, they do the reset, but you have to have one of them for each set you're drawing you're doing if you want the particular transformations, which are the translates, rotates and scales you might want to do, to have an effect on their own, which means that you have to put push matrix and pop matrix around every single command. Now we're going to do it a better way than this, but right now watch how I've push matrix and pop matrix, and then I have to draw a shape in between each one. Okay, so we should have 4 sets of those in total. When we run, we get a completely different result. You'll notice that we can actually see the shapes now. So why couldn't we see them the first time? Well, the reason, simply put, was that when you do a single push matrix and pop matrix and put all the drawings in between, every one of these translate commands is cumulative, which means we don't get the result we want. Instead, this push matrix, then draw your shape, then pop matrix, that effectively makes it happen on a new, clean transformation plane. That all the matrices that have been affected here for translate, they're cleaned once again, they're blank, and you can start drawing as if you're drawing on a blank canvas. So that can be a little bit hard at first, but let me put it a slightly different way. Let us take the code that we have here and we'll change it once more. Okay, so now we're drawing at position 1, 1, and we should see it up in the corner there. And if we want to draw another shape, you notice that we put this shape here in and we say 100, 100. We should see both shapes at the same time. Okay, so one is at position 1, 1 and the other is 100, 100. Now we're not going to change the 100, but we're going to change this to be 100. So we might expect to just see one shape drawn in the exact same position, and then the other shape drawn in the exact same position, so that you only see one shape. But watch what happens. We get two shapes. So wait a minute, we drew them in the same place. Why are we seeing it twice? Well, that's the translate being cumulatively applied. The first translate says move down to here. The second translate is applied and it moves down to here. So when we change it, and let's watch how we can change that, we're going to add in our push matrix. We're going to add in a pop matrix. So now when we run, just one item. Now really just two there, but one's overlaying the other. So let's start from a clean slate and do some more cool things with shapes. And we're going to start with a whole new blank program again. And what we're going to do this time is similar, but we're just going to change how we create shapes a little bit and get an idea for calling methods in our program with parameters. So it's very similar to what we had before. We'll go with, say, 600 by 600. We'll make a square window this time, and we'll put in our draw method. Remember, setup is called once and draw is called several times a second, depending on what frame rate we're on. And we're going to set our background, which will reset the screen so that everything is drawn on a blank canvas every time. So I'm going with a black background here. I can change it to be anything I want. You could have a red background, white background like this. It's really up to you. When you're creating your programs and when you're doing, when you're going for a visual effect, you'll have different background styles you want. And of course you can change them over time. That could be a variable there as well. So what we're going to do is draw a couple of different shapes, and we'll go with draw shape. And we'll pass in a few parameters. We'll pass in the X and Y position we want it drawn in, the rotation angle we want it to be rotated by, and we'll pass in, we're going to pass in a few different values on this, but just to make sure that much works so far, we'll set our values here. We'll say int X equals 100, int Y equals 100, and int the rotation to be 45. So our draw shape method has to be spelled exactly the same with capitalization and everything else. And of course I can't spell, but we know that already. And we'll say X comma int Y comma int rotation. Now I should really use a float for rotation, but we're trying to keep it as simple as possible. So our very first command here is push matrix. And remember, in the previously, just a few minutes ago, we were able to say that push matrix and pop matrix gives us sort of a clean blank slate to work on. And then we're going to say translate to X comma Y before we draw our item, and then rotate by radians, and we'll pass in the rotation angle. Okay, and then I'm going to draw my shape. So I'll say begin shape, and I'll give some vertexes. So remember, because we've translated 0, 0 is the corner we've translated to. And we'll move, say, 100, 0. So now we're drawing to the right, then we draw down, and then finally we draw back again, and we then should close our shape, or we could close it manually, but we'll let processing do the work for us. And we might want to set things like the color and so on. So we can say set the pen color with the stroke command, and we'll say 0, 0, give it black outline. We'll set stroke weight to 3, and we'll fill it with a color. We'll go with 255, comma 1, 27, comma 96. There we go. Okay, so let's run this and see what we get. And we get a diamond, which is the square shape we gave in the vertices, but rotated at a 45-degree angle. Now, let's pass in a few more parameters. Let's pass in color fill col. Okay, and we'll set our color fill col equals, what do we say? What type of color will we go with? We'll go with the same color we had, 255, comma 127, comma 96, and then we'll pass in here fill col, and then we'll use it down here with fill col. So what I've done there is I've added a new parameter. Remember we said we'd be changing the parameters. We've told it what parameter to expect, and then we've used the parameter here. And if we've done it properly, we get our filled in color. So these are all local variables that we've created to pass in here. But we could have actually skipped a step. We could have just said 100, comma 100, comma 45, comma, and then copy this, and it would have the same effect. We could have actually deleted these, and when we run, we get exactly the same thing. So what's that tell us? Well, it tells us that we can draw a shape here. We'll get 4 of them. We'll pick different locations. We'll go to 300 here, and still on 100, and then 300 and 300, and then we'll just do 3 to start off with. We'll rotate them by different amounts. So we'll rotate this one by 65 instead, so it'll be a bit different, and 25 here, and we'll change the colors here. Okay, so we should get 3 different colors and 3 different shapes, and they're all rotated a different amount. Well, they're all the same shape, but they're rotated. Now, how do we have that? Well, several times a second it's calling these shapes. And what we can start to do is see how we can change the output just by changing these parameters. Draw shape is our method which does all the work. And how it does that work, well, we'll just go through it again. We have set our pen color, the thickness of the pen, the fill color. It takes a parameter that was passed in, and parameters is what we're interested in here. Being able to pass information to the method, telling it what to do. So push, matrix, translate, rotate, they all take the parameters in, and then we always draw the same shapes. And that's not quite what we should be doing. We always draw a square, but we can change that later on. So far so good. What if we wanted to draw lots and lots of these shapes on the screen, but we wanted to draw them in random positions each time? Well, we could decide in a loop just how many we wanted to draw. And let's decide we're going to draw 100 of these shapes each single frame on the screen. Okay. And we will pass in a few different things. We'll say a random number that goes up to the entire width of the screen. And we'll also pass in a random number that goes up to the entire height of the screen, and a random number that goes up to 360 degrees. Okay. And finally we have our color, and we want to use a cast. That's where we specify that the value we want to get is an integer, because we're expecting integers down here, though we could have put in floats, but we'll just tell it to expect integers. So now when we run, we get completely crazy because we're running about 60 frames a second, and that's very, 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 very crazy. So we also can put in a random colors here. So we'll go random 255. So we don't want always the same color. Okay. And then where else have we? We've got one more thing. Up here, just do a little trick to set the frame rate to be 1, so that once a second it will update all the shapes. Okay. Now we could also do this. We could also remove the background command and add only 2 shapes a second and watch what happens. First 2 more, 2 more, every second 2 more get added, till eventually the screen will be completely filled in. So just to recap on what's happening here, if it's not immediately apparent. Background clears the screen. If I don't have background, I get this very flickery effect because there's so many frames being drawn. So I can slow down that by saying I only want 1 frame per second. But that's not the default. So I could double the speed by doing that, or I could go to its default speed, which is much faster. So if we think about it, we have to either, if we want to have a continuous shape being drawn and moved, we have to store it somehow. And that's a little bit beyond the scope of this introductory video. Or we have to think hard about what results we expect to see. And instead of drawing lots of shapes, I'm just going to draw a few different shapes. But I'm not going to be using random all the time. Okay? But we're going to specify what type of shape we want. And we're going to use a loop. And the first loop is going to be drawing across the screen. Okay, and we'll actually, we won't start at 0, we'll start at width divided by 4. X less than width, and x plus equals width divided by 4. Now, to start off with, we're starting x at a quarter of the width of the screen. Okay, so 25% in. Keep going until we are, or sorry, while we are less than the width. But each time we go up by the width divided by 4, so we add that to ourselves. So we want to keep moving up by a quarter. So we should get 3 things drawn because eventually we will hit the width of the screen. So we put our x in here and we specify this and color 255, 196, 50. Okay, so when we draw our shape now, we expect to see our 3 shapes. Now, if you'll notice that the shape is drawn from this point here, so they're not centered on the screen. And we could change that, but right now we're trying to show that we can specify a row of items with our loop. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. What we're doing here is we're specifying a quarter, halfway, 3/4. There's another point here, but we've gone too far at that point. We can also specify 0. Okay. And look what we get when we specify 0. Because we're so close, we can get more values in, because we don't start until we start very close to the edge. So our ability to change positions or have ordered positions is affected by the parameter we're passing in x, and x is specified here. So let's do a few little tricks. First of all, we're going to pass another value in here, which is the transparency value. So that's how transparent our fill color is. And you see it's a little bit transparent there, a bit lighter than it was. And we're also going to change our values here a little bit with our parameters. So let's start here and go up by 10. And let's add in a few extra bits. So we should get quite a few of these now. That's good. And next, let's create a value called int rot equal to frame count. Now, we see frame count is a number of frames that have happened since the beginning of our program. And we pass that in here. And now our shapes start rotating. Now they're rotating about their corner point, but that's what we expect. That's how we drew them. Okay. And next we add in another loop. Only this time it's Y. And Y is now going to be percentages of height. We pass in Y there. So watch what happens now. Okay. And we'll fill slightly more on the screen if we add in equals here. Okay, it's a little bit hypnotic. So we're going to change the colors as well. So we want to put a different color. We can do a lot of tricks with colors. You can have palettes and everything else, but I think we'll just do a fairly small trick. You can map values, and this is probably something you should investigate and see how it fits your own sort of sense of style and sense of color. But you can just play with the values for now. But you'll notice the reason I made them transparent, I'll show you why I made them transparent. You can see the difference. It's nice to see the sort of faded effect and see the lines when you do it this way. So that's why I made them transparent. So they're both nice effects. So we'll go with 150 this time. Okay. And next what we do is we change one of these values to be affected by X and Y. So we could do something very simple like X plus Y, but it's just to show you that you get a little bit of a gradient, though not much in this case. Or you could, let me just show you a trick. If we were to take the draw shape command and instead of passing in color with these values, we could actually pass in values for the colors which were based on the X and Y and rotation values, just as a trick. So we'll pass in OR, comma G, comma B, and we'll make OR by we'll map it to something. So the map command is very useful. You can put in a value, for instance X, and specify its current range, which is 0 to width, and then specify the range you want to map it to, which is 0 to 255 in the case of RGB. And we can actually copy that and do it for G for green and B for blue, only we'll map the Y value here. And for B, which is the blue, we can set that as well. In this case, I'm going to set it to X plus Y, and for no real reason, just for fun, the maximum, the minimum and maximum of that is 0 to width plus height. And when we run that, we'll see what values we get. We get a very, well, it's very colorful, let's put it that way. And we can comment out some things. We can say things like comment out the stroke weight, comment out stroke. We can even say no stroke, so there's no pen stroke. And when we run it, we get no black outline on the shapes, but it still looks very nice. I'm going to comment that out and keep the pen stroke, but I'm going to make it lighter. There we go. So what we should be getting from this is that by creating just one method that takes in the parameters that we want and then specifying those parameters in a programmatic way, we can get very nice effects. And processing makes this possible by giving us very nice commands like the structure is setup and draw. Setup calls once, draw calls several times every second. Background clears the screen. Then we can create values that use information like frame count, which processing gives us width and height. And then we can call our methods. And the hard work is done down here by setting our pen color and weight, by setting our fill color, by then making sure that none of the commands we use affect any others, translating to the position we want, rotating, beginning our shape, drawing our shape based on the vertices, and then finally closing our shape. So hopefully that's given you a nice little introduction to how this code all works. Really, this is aimed at people who are just getting used to what processing can do. There's an awful lot in processing. You will learn an awful lot, but it will take time. And I think you'll be impressed by what you can do, though it is frustrating when you first start. So I'm going to stop this one here, and I have another one coming up shortly about strings.